In this demo, I want to go ahead and take a look at event handling in JavaScript. So to start with, we're going to start with an empty HTML template. So I'm in Atom, and I'm going to have this HTML template, and I'll title it Event Handling. And there's really three different ways to handle events, so we'll go through each of those three different ways to handle events. And I'm just going to title this events.js. Okay, so the first way to handle events is pretty traditional in that I can set up an event handler inside of my HTML. So I can have a button, type equal to button, and I'm going to get rid of the name here, and just have an on-click event handler. My on-click event handler is going to trigger an event named inline event, and I'm going to set the inline event text of that button. Okay, so this is fairly traditional. It's been around since JavaScript's been around. We embed our event handler right inside of an attribute within our HTML. So I want to go ahead and save this. I'm going to save it on my desktop in a new folder called events as index.html. Okay, so there's our file. And in order for this to function, I have to have a function named inline event, and I'm going to embed that over in events.js. So I'm going to have that new file, events.js. I'm going to have a const inline event equal to some function definition. And all we're going to do is console.log. Here's my inline event. Okay, so in order for that to work, all I have to do is click on the button when I access the page. So I'm going to open this in a browser. So here's my inline event. I'm going to bring up the developer tools so we can see the console, and you'll see this inline event is getting triggered every time I click on the button. Okay, so that works great. Where we run into complications is, let's say I wanted to set up an application where users were going to buy things. So for instance, this button, instead of being an inline event, was an add to cart button. And for every product that we have in our store, we're going to have a button add to cart. So you can imagine my page of all of my products that I want to sell is dynamically populated based on a database. So let's say I had 20 products I want to sell, and I have an add to cart button for each one of those products. I run into a problem because I can't really have an add to cart method for each of my add to cart products. So it's fine with 20 products, but what happens when I have 200 or 2,000 or 2 million products? I can't really have a unique event handler for each of those buttons. So what I'm getting at is, let's say I had a second button that also triggered the inline event method. So this will be inline event 1 and inline event 2. I go ahead and save it. Now I have two buttons, and they're both going to trigger that function. Okay, so you can see how whether I'm clicking the first button or the second button, I'm triggering the same event handler. And I really have to write it that way if I'm going to use the example that I hypothetically gave you, which is an add to cart method. Okay, the problem is no matter which button I click, I end up in this event handler. And since I end up in the event handler, I need to be able to determine which button did you actually click. Did you click the first one or the second one? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in a reference to this. And when I'm talking about the this keyword in this context, I'm really talking about this button or this button. Okay, so when I click on the button, I'm going to get a reference to whichever button triggered that event. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save that. I'm going to go back over to my function. I want to add a new parameter, which is the control. And the control here is which button. It's a reference to the button. Since I only have one parameter and I'm using this modern function syntax, I can get rid of the parentheses around my parameter. Okay, so now I have a reference to the control. And what I'm going to do, instead of logging console.log inline event, I'm going to log the control. Okay, so I go ahead and refresh this. You'll notice I get the first button, and then I'll get the second button, and second button, and first button. So you can see how I'm getting the different data depending on which button I'm triggering. Okay. Another thing that's going to come up with this is, let's say I wanted to embed some data with this button. So for instance, I come back over to my button and I have a data product ID. So I'm still working on the example of an add to cart button, and I embed the product ID of the product that I want to add to the cart. Okay, convention here is that this is a non-standard HTML attribute, so I'm using that data dash to retrieve or to store that attribute. So theoretically, I could tie this into like a database lookup to say, okay, this is product ID 1, product ID 2, and then I know more information about that product after I look up the details based on that product ID. Okay, so we have a reference to the button, but I might want to know what the data product ID is. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and refresh this, and you'll notice that I run into a problem. It tells me that the product is not defined, and a lot of people think this has to do with the hyphens inside that attribute name. And the reality is since I'm using a non-standard HTML attribute to store the product ID, which I should be, it's perfectly fine, and it's a way to embed metadata into my HTML attributes. Since I am doing that, I can't use the dot notation to access those attribute values. Instead, I have to use the get attribute syntax. Okay, so I use the get attribute syntax, and now I'm able to get the data product ID depending on the product that I want. Okay, so anytime I'm using a non-standard HTML attribute, I'm going to use the get attribute method to retrieve that attribute value. Even if I am using standard HTML attributes, I can use the get attribute method. It's probably the preferred way to get attribute values. Up until this point, we've used dot notation to access those values, but the preferred way is probably to use the get attribute method. Okay? So this is a tried and true method. It works great. We have inline events. The problem with this is I'm setting myself up for failure here. It's really hard to modify these events, and we'll talk about that in a later screencast. But the main problem that I have with inline event handlers is I'm embedding JavaScript inside my HTML. Ultimately, I'm going to hand off my HTML file over to a graphic designer, and that graphic designer is going to make my site look nice, because it doesn't right now. And I really don't want to mess up my buttons, because a graphic designer is going to know what a button is, but it's not going to know what a button is with all of this extra JavaScript crap inside here. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that I'm pulling that JavaScript out. Okay, so inline events work great. I can use inline events. Their browser compatibility is not an issue, but I am embedding JavaScript inside of my HTML. So a secondary approach to event handling. So if I go ahead and put an HR tag here, and I just want to go ahead and copy one of these buttons, I'm going to show you the secondary approach. So instead of using an inline event, I want to call this dot notation events. Okay, and in the JavaScript world, this was like the event handling 2.0. And instead of having an inline event method here, an on-click event here, I'm going to get rid of it altogether. I don't have an on-click attribute for my dot notation stuff, but what I do need is I need to have an ID associated with this button. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this dot notation, and I'm going to go ahead and save it. And because I don't have an event handler here, I know that I need to set up an event handler in my JavaScript. So down here at the bottom of the page, I'm going to have a script where I trigger an init method, and that's going to allow me to set up the event handler. Okay, so over in events.js, I'll have that init method. Excuse me. Okay, so now that I have this init method, what I want to do is I want to get a reference to the button. So document.querySelector. I have a reference to the button. The button name is dot notation, so I get a reference to the button. And then I'm going to set up a new event handler by saying dot onClick. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this is going to be my dot notation event handler. Okay, and I'm going to need a function called dot notation event handler. So here's my dot notation event handler. It's equal to some function definition. And all I'm going to do is just start off with a console.log. Okay, so if I refresh this, I have an error here because I have the wrong query selector. I'm using an ID selector, but I don't have the pound sign in front of my ID. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh this, and you'll notice that when I click on this dot notation button, I get hello as many times as I click. I run into the same problem. So over here in my HTML, if we're talking about an add to cart type of application, I might use this dot notation for the product ID, and I might have a bunch of these, right? So I might have button 3, 4, 5, 6, how many ever buttons I have. I need to be able to determine the button that triggered my event. Okay, so using traditional functions, okay, so I probably should have started this way. So I want to use traditional functions first. So I'm going to have a function. If I use traditional functions, then I can use this keyword to refer to the button. Okay, so you'll notice I have a reference to the button. I don't have to do anything to receive that functionality. That's built into JavaScript. Because I'm using a dot notation event handler, and this function that I just defined is triggered as a result of that click action, then this keyword is automatically going to reference the control that triggered the event. In this case, our button with the dot notation text. Okay, and I said this goes back to the video when we were talking about modern functions. Modern functions work exactly the same way as functions, with the one exception that I'm going to show you right now. So if I use a modern function, with arrow syntax. Okay, so I go back to a modern function and I try that same thing that I just did. You'll notice that I no longer have a reference to the button, but I have a reference to the global window object. And that's a problem with event handling. I really can't do anything with the global window object. I really need a reference to the button. Okay, so the new way to handle this is instead of using this keyword, I want to use something else. And this is kind of a tangent here from JavaScript, but I'm going to go ahead and open up a new file in Atom. And you can imagine if I had a house class in Java or C# or something like that, and in my house class I had information about the house. So for instance, I might want to know how many square feet. I might want to know what color it was. I might want to know what the exterior material is. And I might want to know the number of garage, the size of the garage. Okay, so we can call that garage size, I guess. And then based on all of those instance variables, I might have a method to calculate the cost of the house. So public double calc cost. And in here I might do something like return this dot square feet times 100. And that's a simplified calculation, but let's assume that that's the calculation that I want to calculate the cost of building a house. It's a rough estimate. Okay, so that's great. But then what happens if I say, okay, I want to create a house. So I say house equal to new house. And I set some attributes like a house dot square footage is equal to 1500. And then here's where the curveball comes is on click. So I'm going to have a button. on a page, theoretically, that's going to trigger a house's calc cost method. Okay, so in JavaScript, I think that's fairly straightforward. What we'd do is we'd create a house, we'd set, and I think I said in JavaScript it's fairly straightforward, and I meant Java. We'd have a house, the house square footage would be 1500, so this instance variable would be 1500. When we calculate the cost, we say, oh, it's 1500 times 100, and we come up with our cost to build a house. Okay, so that's great. That's not a problem. But imagine this in JavaScript. So I have a house, I set the square footage to 1500, so I have this instance variable, it's equal to 1500. And then, as a result of this onClick event, I end up in this calc cost method. Well, now the question becomes, is the this a house, or is it the button? And in JavaScript, the way this would work using traditional functions is that the this keyword would actually refer to the button, or the control that triggered the event that put us there. And we really can't have that. So the this keyword kind of gets hijacked as a result of using an instance method within a class definition. Okay, and we haven't talked about class definitions in JavaScript, and really there's not such a thing as class definitions, but there's a similar thing in JavaScript. So we run into this exact problem. Okay, so it's probably a bad idea for us to be using the this keyword in our event handler. Okay, so we're using modern functions. We're fixing the problem, but also breaking things at the same time. So we're fixing the problem. We don't want to use the this keyword. We no longer can use the this keyword, so now our code is broken. But what we can do instead is our functions will automatically, our event handlers will automatically get passed an event object, and since that's the only parameter that we want, we don't need parentheses around it. And then we can use that event object to get the current target. Okay, which is going to give us the same exact functionality in that we get the control that triggered the event. That's what the current target is. So if I go ahead and refresh this page, now you'll see I get access to the button again. So if I want, I can do event.currentTarget.getAttribute data product ID. Okay, so now I log the product ID, whether it's an inline event or our new dot notation event handler. Okay. Okay, so then one last way to handle events that will come up in JavaScript is using add event listener. So I'm going to go ahead and add another HR tag. So I have my other HR tag. I want to copy a button. So I'm going to call this add event listener. Event listener has a data product ID of 4. So we should look fairly good there. And I can set that up in my init method. So I want to get a reference to my button, that event listener button. So I'm going to have my button event listener equal to document.querySelector event listener. So I get a reference to the button, and I want to trigger an event. The syntax for triggering this event is I'm going to call the add event listener method. And the syntax for this is, which event am I listening for? So it could be click, it could be change, it could be mouse over or mouse out or blur, but I leave off the prefix. So you'll notice it's not on click, it's just click. And then the second parameter is the event that you want to trigger. So I'm going to call this add event listener event. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and set this up the same way. So add event listener event is equal to same concept here, where I get passed the event. And I can use the same type of syntax that I used in dot notation. Okay, so very, very similar. And you'll notice it works effectively the same way. Okay, if given the choice, if you don't have any browser compatibility issues or anything like that, and you're given the choice of, you can use inline events or dot notation events, or you can use this add event listener syntax. The W3C, so the World Wide Web Consortium, their recommendation is to use the add event listener method for your event handling. Okay, and what we'll do is we'll talk about, what are the advantages and disadvantages, why does it matter? You can see that no matter how we handle events, we can handle them. So why would there be a recommendation to say, oh, you should use the add event listener as opposed to using the dot notation event handling or using inline events? So we'll look at kind of the differences between the event handlers going forward. So this video is really meant to just be an introduction into, hey, there's 3 different types of event handling models that are in JavaScript, and here they are. Here's the syntax for them, and just kind of showing you how they work.